Thank you for coming to the Chippewa County Historical Society's quarterly meeting and program. I'm Susan James, Library Manager here at Bayliss, Assistant Director of the Superior District Library, and Board Member, Corresponding Secretary, and Office Manager, I guess, of the Chippewa County Historical Society. So thanks again for coming, and I have a few remarks. I'd like to thank Larry Chabot for coming tonight and his wife Betty. I'd like to thank our student volunteer Katie Green in the back on the camera. Thank you very much for your help. And the board, of course, for help with the refreshments and the setup. And I'd like to acknowledge the board members here tonight. We have a good crowd of them. Mary June, you all know, is our past president. Bernie Arbig behind her is our treasurer and the hummus bringer. And Bob Aldrich and Don are here. Don's one of our volunteers. And Jim Dwyer on camera in the back, green shirt. Dennis Hank is here. Oh, there he is in the back. Of course, Carolyn Person in the purple on the side there. And Karen Sabatine in the blue. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate all your help. We, of course, are looking for volunteers to help us in many ways, and I didn't clear this with Carolyn, but we always need people to help with our collections, and that's mostly on Mondays and Fridays. Don's been helping us, and Carolyn is in charge of that. So also we need help moving items out of the houses, the historic homes on Water Street, this weekend on Saturday and Sunday. And we need help in our gift shop. So if you're interested in any of those projects, speak to one of us and we'll let you know more details. Our building and gift shop are at 115 Ashland Street. And many of you have been there, but if you haven't, please stop by. We're open most weekdays from 1 to 4 through the fall at our front door. Also, like I said, we have office hours Mondays and Fridays at the back door, but you may want to call first. We're in the midst of our NEA Big Read grant project. That's with the Superior District Library. And some of the events are with the Historical Society, and I put some flyers over there. 2 events are coming up. There's one next Tuesday that's taking place here. It's our president, Caroline Grabowski, speaking about one of her books. It's called Headlines and Headstones from Sault Ste. Marie's Historic Past. So that will be next Tuesday at 7 p.m. And then a week and a half later, on Saturday, October 22nd, at 1 o'clock, she will be leading a tour of Maple Ridge Cemetery. So that's our seasonal tour of Maple Ridge Cemetery up on the hill, and that's $5 by $5 donation. Then for strictly Chippewa County Historical Society events, our next ones are at the building at 115 Ashland. On Wednesday, November 16th at 7 p.m., we have over there a display and presentation by Dan Sherman about his father, Pete Sherman, who was formerly of the Sioux and who served in World War II. So that display and presentation will be there Wednesday night, the 16th of November. And then our holiday open houses in December 3rd and 10th. So our newsletter is over there along with the libraries. Please help yourselves. And there's also a membership brochure if anyone's interested in joining our group. So I'd like to welcome back Larry Chabot, who spoke here in 2007. I just advanced your thing. I'll fix it. He's a native of Ontonagon who studied at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. He lived in White Pine for 32 years while he worked for Copper Range Company. His interest in writing began in elementary school. His work has appeared in such publications as Michigan History Magazine and Marquette Monthly Newspaper. He's written 2 UP history books. They're on the table. The UP Goes to War, Upper Michigan and Its Heroes in World War II, came out in 2006, and Saving Our Sons, How the Civilian Conservation Corps Rescued a Generation of Upper Michigan Men, 2009. His topic tonight is 12 true Sioux tales about various visitors to Sault Ste. Marie over the years, and I look forward to having him reveal who they are. Please welcome Larry Chabot. Did we advance all this way? I'm sorry. Is that it?
Push preview.
There you go.
All right, sorry about
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. Appreciate the invite again. We were here 9 years ago on Monday and spoke to the society about World War II. This one is called. This one is about some of the famous people who have, and infamous people who have been through this area of the country. It's probably presumptuous of me to come from Marquette to Sault Ste. Marie and talk to you about your history. I gotta admit, most of the history I heard, I learned from Bernie Arbic. He doesn't even know half the stuff I took from him. But Bernie was a help to me on compiling, for one thing, the list of war dead from Chippewa County, which is in the back of my book on World War II. I know this is a seafaring town. I can tell you how many sailors from this county died in World War II. I can tell you how many merchant marine sailors died in World War II, how many total deaths there were from World War II, how many people you had in the service. 4,000. Wow. Absolutely, and I can prove it. I'll also talk to you about the Titanic, which has a direct connection with Sault Ste. Marie. First of all is Joseph Kemp. I don't know if any of you heard of Joseph Kemp. He's a Sioux boy. He was the first UP sailor or soldier to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. This is a picture of the Medal of Honor. I don't know if anybody in this room has ever seen the Medal of Honor. I know I never have. They're very rare. It is the highest award for valor that a serviceman or woman can receive in combat. Joseph Kemp received it in 1864. He was a member of the 5th Michigan Infantry, which was part of the Army of the Potomac. And what he did was, he ran across the battlefield and punched out the flag bearer for the 5th North Carolina Regiment, stole his flag and brought it back to the Union lines. And of course, in those days, the flag was the rallying point for any particular regiment, and he swiped it. And he ran away with it, and for that, Abraham Lincoln presented him with the Medal of Honor, the first of 5 people from the UP over the next 150 years who actually won the Medal of Honor. You don't win it, you're awarded it. His particular regiment had something like 29% casualties. This was a terrible war. As many people died from illness as died from combat wounds. Mr. Kemp, who was a first sergeant in the Army, died at age 73. He was buried downstate in Ann Arbor.
Jim, do you have a question?
Oh, Larry, was that the 4,000, Larry?
Yes,
Was that 4,000 Sioux or 4,000 Chippewa?
Chippewa County.
Oh, okay.
That'd be the whole county. I'm not used to a laptop, as you can tell. There is his headstone. Joseph Kemp's headstone, Medal of Honor. He was a captain. Posthumously, he was promoted to captain. 5th Michigan Infantry, Civil War, buried in Ann Arbor. There's another man. I've never been able to find out anything about him except what he did during the war. I don't know. I can't find a picture of him. I don't know where he lived. And I can't even draw this up.
Larry, I'm curious, did you go to that grave site and take that picture?
No, it's on the internet. If you go to the Medal of Honor Society, they have gravestones of every one of these people, and as time went on, they have photographs of them too. But no, I don't even know where it is, except if you want to look it up, look his name up in the Medal of Honor Society page. Go right to it. There's a citation signed by President Lincoln and a picture of his gravestone. And you can also find them under this fabulous site called Find a Grave. This is a Purple Heart. Purple Heart is awarded to people who are injured or wounded in the line of battle. A man named Andrew Allen of the Sioux received 5 of these. He was injured 5 times in Europe during World War II. He's one of the most decorated Yoopers of all time. He got 11 battle scars, which meant he was in 11 different battles during the war. He single-handedly captured 20 German soldiers all by himself. He was a high school dropout. After 2 years, he joined the army at 21, and he must have cut a wide swath through Europe and through the German army to get that many medals. I've never found anybody in the UP who ever was more highly decorated than him. I think you've all heard of the cruiser Indianapolis. It was the last American ship sunk during World War II. It was the ship which carried the atomic bomb to Tinian Island, where it was assembled and dropped a few days later on Hiroshima, Japan. The Indianapolis was sent to the Philippines. They were required to maintain radio silence. They weren't told about any more Japanese submarines operating in that area. So off they sailed, and unbeknownst to the Navy, which didn't even know it for about 5 days, they were torpedoed. The ship went down, had 1,200 men on it. 900 of these people were dumped into the water. The rest of them went down with the ship. Only 316 of these people survived. And the story of their death is so gruesome, I won't even tell you about it. You don't even want to look it up, how they died. Harry Madigan of the Sioux, seen here with his wife on a website maintained by the family, was one of the men who lost his life. There was one other man on that ship from the UP named Sean Niskanen from Lake Linden, and a third man from Ramsey was dumped into the water and was rescued by a destroyer. Harry Madigan died within 7 days of the end of the war. The actual date was the 31st of July, 1945, and I just had to bring him in. This is one of Bernie's pictures. I swiped from his book. The airplanes flying over, he told me about, in his book, indirectly, he told me about all the barrage balloons. He said there was a series of 4 barrage balloons on a baseball field that were so evenly spaced that they served as the 4 bases during a baseball game. Thank you, Bernie.
I remember it well.
These balloons were set up so that low-flying airplanes would not be able to fly over the Sioux and, of course, attack its most precious asset other than its people, which was the locks, which carried almost all of the iron ore needed to fuel our economy during the war. There were 151 men from Chippewa County who lost their lives in World War II. There may be more, but these are the ones that I was able to find. Bernie gave me some names off of the monument downtown. 42 of these people died in the Pacific. 18 of them died in France, the leading country. People from the Sioux died all over the world, every major battlefield, every major ocean. They died, they fell out of the sky in airplanes, they were in submarines. They certainly did their part. One of them, Arnie Hopala from the Sioux, was captured in the Philippines when the Japanese invaded in 1942. He was put on in 1944, after 2 years of captivity in the Philippines. He was put on what's called a hell ship, where the Japanese would take the American prisoners, stuff them into the hold of an unmarked freighter, and ship them to Japan to work in the mines or mills or other war-related industries. And since the ship was unmarked and it was very low in the water because of all the bodies on board, it was torpedoed by an American submarine and down it went. And Arnie was one of the unfortunate victims. Chippewa County's death rate was 3.8% of the number of people who were in service. That's 3.8% of 4,000. The American average was 2.5, we were way above that. The UP average was 3.3, we were way above that. So nobody could ever say that the Sioux and Chippewa County didn't do their part. During the war, we had about 60,000 people who moved out of the Upper Peninsula. That counts the 46,000 Upers who were in service, plus those who followed the troops, plus those who worked in defense plants. But we had 50,000 come back in the form of of Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Corps, and 10th Mountain Division, and all kinds of other outfits at 45 different sites throughout the Upper Peninsula. Of those 50,000, 17,000 were right here. The most at any one time, I think, was 7,300, but they were here to guard the locks. There's an interesting story about that later involving the President of the United States who was here and explained how that came about. There was also a lot of construction at Reiko on this mystery airfield. You can still see it from satellites. It's still listed on maps, a perfect triangle with no words, no names, nothing. And anybody who's delved into this, any degree, will find out that it's a prime source for flying saucer enthusiasts who believe that they take off and land there regularly. But there was an air base built there, and it was worked on diligently by hundreds and hundreds of people until later in the war, when it became evident that the Sulaks didn't need to be protected as tightly as they were before, and that this airfield was no longer needed. I read about one guy who was living in a garage in Reiko with 11 other people, and he was paying $6 a week to sleep on the floor of this garage. As the war fortunes turned, then the military presence in the UP began to fade. We had people from one end to the other, literally. And in the Norrie section of Ironwood, on the Wisconsin border, there was a MP camp, military police. There was a radar station up north in the Keweenaw, and there was facilities down in Menominee County, and everywhere in between. This is Hugh Drum. I'm sure some of you heard of Hugh Drum. He was born at Fort Grady in 1879. His father, John, was killed in the Spanish-American War. Hugh Drum rose to the rank of Army Chief of Staff of the United States Army during World War I. After the war, he became Deputy Chief of Staff to General Douglas MacArthur when he became Chief of Staff. He became a general in 1939, and he was he didn't. He retired in 1943. He became a general in 1920. 23 years as a general, which set a record for the longest serving general in the history of the United States Army. He retired in 1943 and got a job managing the Empire State Building. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery, and he was a commissioned officer in the Army for 46 years, which is also a record. And there's his gravestone in Arlington National Cemetery. Anytime you want to look up anybody's gravestone in Arlington National Cemetery, just go to anc.com or type Arlington National Cemetery into Google and tell them what you're looking for. There it is. Anybody know this dude? Mark Twain. There was a documentary on public TV 13 a few years ago about Mark Twain, and very early in it, this thing showed up on the screen. Mark Twain's tour around the world, and the very number 2 is Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. I thought, he couldn't have been here. I never heard of it. Bernie never heard of it. Couldn't have showed up. So then I started to research it, found out that he was one of the richest men in the world at the time, and he made some very bad investments, like some of us do from time to time. He went almost bankrupt. He owed $200,000, which is worth $5 million today, and he decided that he would raise money, pay off his debts by traveling around the world. He stopped in Cleveland first, and got on a steamer and came up to Sault Ste. Marie, spoke in the Army here, had a full house, and the Sioux News said it's rarely a city of this size gets to hear and see such a prominent lecturer. And of course, he had the house in stitches because he's one of the funniest people who ever lived. The Opera House was filled with cultured audience. And you can appreciate that, since I am now speaking to a culture. The tickets were 25 cents, 50 cents, 75 cents, and if you wanted to sit up front, it was $1. From here, he went to Mackinac Island and then went around the rest of the world. But here's where he got his start, right here in Sault Ste. Marie. Little guy keeps moving around. John Dillinger. Sorry, I whizzed right by his face. April 17th, 1934. It's a fact, John Dillinger was seen in New York City that day. Also in St. Louis, Missouri, and in New Orleans, Louisiana, and in his hometown of Marion, Indiana, and he was seen in Detroit. He actually was in Detroit because he jumped in his car and he drove up here across the straits in a ferry, and he came straight to Sault Ste. Marie, to the house of Anna Steve on 14th Street. One of the employees of the library lives in that house today. He came in late at night, and he was downstairs in the living room with Anna Steve, who owned the house, Anna Steve's brother, John Hamilton, who was a leading member of John Dillinger's gang. And upstairs was a man named Matt Brown, who was a boarder, and he heard the conversation. He had never met John Hamilton or John Dillinger, but he took it from the conversation that this had to be Anna Steve's brother because of the way the conversation was going. So he comes on the next morning, and Anna Steve says, "Guess who was here last night?" And he said, "Who?" "John Dillinger." "I don't believe it." "Yes, he did. He even took my car." I swapped cars with him because the FBI will recognize his car. And I put his car in my garage. She said I even gave him a haircut. John Dillinger then could smell the FBI coming after him. And he went all the way through the Upper Peninsula, even a couple other towns, at least one of them was Republic that he visited. He stopped in a gas station there. And he walked in, and the old boy sitting around the stove, just silence. He went into the bathroom. They could hear him doing his business. They hear him flush the toilet. He comes out. Nobody said a word. They just followed him with their eyes. He got back in his car, paid for his gas, gave a $5 tip, and drove away. The FBI, by the way, in the meantime, was chasing him. They landed in St. Ignace in 2 different airplanes and went to the zoo, but of course it was too late. So they arrested Anna Steve. It was her fault, really. And she got 4 months in prison. Here she is, a mother of 6, president of the PTA, and she wound up in prison for 4 months as an accessory to the crime. See on Noggin there, Allen's drugstore on Noggin, he went in there to buy a pack of cigarettes, and my father was standing there picking up a copy of the Chicago Tribune, which came in on the Milwaukee Road every day. He picks up the paper, and there's Dillinger's picture on the front, and there's Dillinger buying some cigarettes. I wasn't even born yet. If he'd been packing heat and shot my dad, I wouldn't be here. He was also in Dearton. As John Hamilton was drunk by the time they reached Dearton, and he chased a little boy into the woods. The boy circled around and went back to the Dearton store, told the manager about it, who called the police, and they headed for Dearton. But he was down in Foster City by then, changing somebody's tire. He came along in the middle of the night. The guy had a flat tire. His family was in the car. He was a CCC employee. And John Dillinger pulled his car up and shone the lights on the tire so the man could change it. And when he went over to thank this man for being so kind to him, he rolled down the window and he said, "You can tell your family John Dillinger helped you change your tire." He rolled the window up. He was seen in all these different places, from Erie to northern Wisconsin. He had a famous shootout in Manitowish Waters. None of his gang members were hurt or injured, but John Dillinger, then 3 months later, was murdered or killed in Chicago by the FBI, by Elliot Ness, no less. And that's where his trail ended. John Hamilton was also murdered about 2 weeks before John and Anna Steve paid to have her brother buried. Anybody know this guy? Herbert Hoover. What was he doing here? This is 1920. He wasn't president, he wasn't Secretary of Commerce yet, but he's world famous because he was the leader of the relief effort for the starving people, especially of Belgium, who were suffering after the World War I and ended and their economies were devastated, as was their agriculture. So he led this massive relief effort. He got himself elected president of the AIME, which is the American Institute of Mining Engineers at that time. Now it's the added metallurgical and petroleum. He was going to the convention in August of 1920 with 1,000 other engineers in Minneapolis. And he and hundreds of these people left Buffalo in 1920, and the date was August 20th, something like that. And the news reports showed him getting off the boat in Houghton. The only way you can get from Buffalo to Houghton is to come through the locks, so he came through the locks. There was an item in the Marquette Mining Journal in March of that year which said that Hoover was probably going to be here and that the town might be planning a celebration of some kind. But evidently he slipped right through. He did spend time here. He spent several hours here with he and, how can you miss him and 500 engineers? But he went through. He landed in Houghton. All these engineers came down to the Market Iron Range, visited various mines. Some of them played a little golf. He didn't, but then they all took off and left. Then he came back, not here, but he came back to Onondaga when he was Secretary of Commerce in 1922. He was inspecting various water systems in the United States, and he wound up in Onondaga, Michigan. I have a picture of him landing there and getting off the train. So he was a frequent visitor. People keep saying, how can so many people come to this remote area of the country? Well, they're the ones that are remote. We're here. As you know, it's a local call to God, right? 906 is God's country. William Howard Taft, in the middle of this bunch of people, inspecting a facility in Marquette. In 1911, he decided he would campaign for re-election. He'd been elected president in 1909, replacing Teddy Roosevelt. He fell in disfavor with Teddy, who decided to run against him on the Bull Moose ticket in 1912. So Taft decided in 1911 he was going to campaign around the country. He came to Marquette. He also came to the Sioux. I have an article from the New York Times which describes his trip through the locks. He dropped 19 feet. He wanted to see the locks because the Panama Canal was being built at the time, and he wanted to see how a lock worked. He had no idea until he arrived here. He got here about noon. They had a big parade for him, parade of automobiles through the town. He had tea at the fort, the major. They had cheering crowds everywhere. He made a major address in the armory. He reviewed the troops. And at 6 o'clock, he took off from Marquette. He had a person with him named Archie Butt. I'll tell you about Archie Butt later. Here's the article from the New York Times. Taft sees locks of Big Sioux Canal. President goes through on tug to gain an idea of what Panama will be like. Harry Truman. Anybody know that Harry Truman was a war hero? Harry Truman was a captain in the infantry in the American Expeditionary Force in World War II. He led an artillery outfit. He was wounded in action. Actually, a shell landed near him and blew him right off his feet. Did not seriously injure him, but he was a man who knew and experienced the hell of war. He was here on August 29th, 1955 for the 100th anniversary of the locks. He spoke at the auditorium. He got a standing ovation, and he told the crowd, "I find it wonderful that a man who's been through as many controversies as I have can still find people that like me." And so they gave him another standing ovation. And then he said that when he was a senator, and he was head of a war investigation committee in about 1940 and 1941, several years before he became vice president and then president, he was afraid that the sabotage agents of foreign governments would be after the Sioux locks because it was so crucial to the war effort in getting all that iron ore through there. So he said he personally raised such a fuss that this led to all of these troops being stationed here in the Sioux. The mayor of the town at the time, the ex-mayor, was named Paul Adams. I don't know if anybody remembers that name. He said, "As long as we live, we will remember this occasion for the rest of our lives." I remember it. I wasn't even there. The Sioux High School choir entertained them in the auditorium. Now, how would I find that out? I found that out, believe it or not, through the Eisenhower Presidential Library in Abilene, Kansas. Now, how they would know that, and nobody else would, but that's the truth. These are a series of White House photographs. I wasn't able to blow any of them up. They're Gerald Ford at Kinchlow Air Force Base, arriving and then taking off again. In July of 1975, he was on Mackinac Island. He stayed in the governor's mansion. He walked up and down the streets. He bought some fudge. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law, Betty's sister, were walking down the street in Mackinac Island. On that day, at that time, the door burst open and out comes President Ford. Shook their hands and they never got over it. The last time I talked, they still talk about it. It's just one of those propitious fortuities. I love that bird. He took a helicopter from Mackinac Island to Kinchlow. He landed at 6:25, and at 6:40 he got on Air Force One and flew to Washington. That's probably the shortest presidential trip ever to the Upper Peninsula. There may have been one shorter. In 1960, John F. Kennedy was running for president, and he flew into Menominee, which is 1 mile from the bridge connecting Menominee and Marinette. Got in a car, drove across the river, gave a speech, drove back across the river, got on the plane again, and took off. So yeah, it's probably the two shortest. He's probably in Menominee 5 minutes twice. But Ford at Kinchlow was, I'm sure Ford was here many times. You know, he was a Michigan boy. He was at Mackinac Island as a Boy Scout. He visited Mackinac Island many times, I'm sure. How could he not visit the Sioux if he was that close? George Bush. George Bush walked the Mackinac Bridge in 1992 while he was president. According to the news reports at the time, there were like 85,000 people, which set a record. And those who were on shore said they could see the bridge sag, but there were so many people. But he was in the Sioux when he got it going. His wife Barbara said, "You and I are going to walk across that bridge." And she handed him his sneakers. They were staying at the Ojibwe Hotel at the time. And she had brought his sneakers on for some reason. So she handed it to him, and sure enough, they walked across the bridge. So he's one of 5 presidents that I know of that have been here. I'm sure you can contribute more to that. Bear with me here. This is merchant ship. Chippewa County lost 28 sailors in World War II. 24 in the Navy, 4 in the Merchant Marines. There may be more. There were 25 people in your county, and I can't find any information about them at all except their names. In the early days of the war, the government didn't release very much information on deaths of American soldiers and sailors and Marines. They said if the family wanted to release the information, fine, but they weren't going to because it would give aid and comfort to the enemy. So instead of saying they died in North Africa, they would say they died in the Mediterranean theater. If they died in New Guinea, they say died somewhere in the Pacific. So those first records many of them were never ever straightened out. 2 more lost their lives at sea who were not. One of them being Arnie Hopla, that I mentioned, who was in the Air Force. Floyd Crist of the Sioux was on the Quinault Victory off California when it blew up. It was an ammunition ship. The fuel caught fire, blew up, and he lost his life. Fred Hansen of Grimley, merchant mariner, was in the L.J. Drake merchant ship, which was torpedoed off Puerto Rico. This is the James Sprunk. This ship was sunk off Guantanamo Bay, Cuba by a German submarine in 1943, and on that ship were Owen Johnston of the Sioux and Bert Jones of Detour. So those are the 4 merchant mariners who lost their lives. These guys were not armed. They weren't even in the service. They didn't get any service benefits, so many years went by. And yet they were more vulnerable to death and injury than any other group, even more so than the Marines. 4% of them died in the war. Each ship had Navy armed guards on it, who were actual members of the Navy and who were armed and were supposed to fend off any attacks, especially from overflying planes or from submarines. say a little prayer over this? Well, that's about the end of it anyway. I want to tell you about the CCC camps. There were 123 of them in the Upper Peninsula, and you had 15 of them here. You had one-eighth of them. Only Schoolcraft County had more. There were 19. The very first camp in the state of Michigan was at, I don't know how to pronounce it, Mio or Mayo. It's on the east shore of Lake Huron. Mayo? Mayo, okay. There were truckloads and busloads and carloads of campers who took off and headed north to build CCC camps along the way. The first group, as I said, went off to Mayo. The second group landed in Graco. Graco had the second camp in the state of Michigan and the first one in the Upper Peninsula. The very day following that, Strong's had the third CCC camp. In fact, the UP had 6 out of the first 10. What's remarkable about this is that the bill authorizing CCC camps was not even passed until Franklin Roosevelt had been in office like 27 days. On the 31st day of March 1933, he signed this bill. 17 days later, there was a camp opening in Virginia. 2 weeks later, Graco was up and running. It's just amazing the way that thing sprang into action. Eventually, there were about 3 million of these young men who were working in CCC camps, making $1 a day, most of which was sent home to help their families. You had to be on welfare at that time. You could not be a school dropout. You had to have at least 3 teeth, things of that nature. And these kids learn how to work. They learn how to live in a community. They learn how to take orders. They learn how to give orders in some cases if they advance through the ranks. They learn how to, the first one, Graco, was all kids from Detroit and Hamtramck, and none of them knew what an axe was. They had to teach them how to chop down a tree. From that start, they turned out to be pretty fabulous employees. The number of CCC employees who went bad in World War II, and they made excellent soldiers, were none. I've never found an example. I've seen testimony from officers who commanded troops that included many CCC boys, and they said they never had trouble with any of them. They knew how to work, they knew how to handle guns, they certainly knew about rough weather, and they certainly knew about rotten roads. The CCC camps lasted 9 years up here. Graco was one of the longest camps, and of course it later on had about 220 German prisoners of war, one of 5 camps in the UP that held these prisoners of war. When I was a little kid, the word spread through our town that the German prisoners of war were going to be marching down the street in front of our house. And sure enough, here they came. There was about 50 of them. And they were really in a good humor, too, because, well, they were well fed, they had nice clean clothes, they had free medical care, and they didn't have to put up with Hitler. They were here in the U.S. where things were pretty swell. And I remember my friends and I stood behind trees and bushes and fired at these guys with our little fake guns. They laughed and waved at us. One of these guys was interviewed about the prospect of Germany ever winning the war. And he said, when we were fighting against the American army, we had heard that New York and Boston and Baltimore and Washington and the other major cities on the East Coast had all been bombed flat by the Luftwaffe. And the war would soon be over and we would win. And when they got off the dock in New York as prisoners of war and saw all the lights blazing in New York and rode the trains across Pennsylvania and Ohio and into Michigan and saw the farmers in their fields, not a single devastated building, they realized we have lost this war. We will never, ever beat these people. I was going to tell you about Archie Butt. Archie Butt was here. He was a captain or major in the Army. He was the military advisor to Teddy Roosevelt. When Roosevelt left office, he passed him on to William Howard Taft, and Butt was with Taft when he came up here and came to the Sioux. A few months later, he took a vacation. He went to Europe, spent 6 weeks there, and on April 12th, 1912, he climbed aboard the Titanic and he was never seen again. Everybody said he was just a swell fellow. Everybody who met him here, all his professional colleagues said he was just one fabulous guy, but he was one of the 1,500 who lost their lives. There were 3 people heading for the Sioux on that ship. One was Jovo Kalic from Croatia, his brother Peter from Croatia. Neither of them made it. They were in 3rd class, and very few of the 3rd class people survived that horrible tragedy. Ernst Stodstedt, S-J-O-S-T-E-D-T, headed for the Sioux, and he made it. I don't know if he's still here. I don't know if he's in the room. But he lived. He was one of the few to survive and come forward. And actually, there were 27 people from the Upper Peninsula on that ship. There was an entire family from Crystal Falls, father, mother, and 4 kids, who were in 3rd class, and they never made it. Other than Ernst, there were 3 survivors. They were all from the Copper Country. There was a pair of sisters and the child of one of them. This one woman named Simcock spent years traveling around to every service club, being interviewed constantly about what it was like to survive the Titanic. She was about 21 at the time, so her recollection was very sharp, and she was a very popular speaker. I have to say that I have received a lot of help from the Bayliss staff over the years, a lot of questions. They answered promptly or referred me to the expert, because Bernie's stuff has been so helpful to me over the years. If it weren't for Bayliss and Bernie, my talk would probably last about 3 minutes. Nothing wrong with that, right? Back in the days, I don't know if they do this anymore, but the library sent me 3 months worth of copies on microfilm of the Sioux Evening News. And then there were dozens of articles about John Dillinger. And I have them with me, and I'm giving them back to you now, and I want you to know how much I appreciate that. I don't know if you do that anymore.
Not so much.
Not so much,
No.
because this is a very precious asset, and when you put it in the mail and send it to somebody, there are times when it never gets sent back. I know of cases where in our historical society, people have requested folders. They sat at the desk. One of them was a university professor, and he went through this folder of old clippings and stuff and walked out the door with it. Never came back. Gone forever. Gone forever. I wrote a book about World War II for one reason. Nobody else did. When I was researching articles for Marquette Monthly, I couldn't find a single book about World War II involving the Upper Peninsula. I didn't even know who died at Pearl Harbor except the boy who lived across the street from me. So his brother lives in Gladstone, and he and I put together a list of the 12 people who died on Pearl Harbor Day from the UP, which is an extraordinarily high number considering our population then and now. So I wrote this book and wrote about what it was like on the home front, what it was like on the battlefront, what it was like when the bodies were returned. There was a series of funeral ships that brought the bodies back for those families which wanted their people reburied. It was all about the rationing, what our mothers and dads went through at that time. So many things that were necessary in their lives were now rationed to the point where you got hardly anything, or you had to grow your own. It talks about the military sites. There's about 5-6 pages on Fort Brady and the Sioux. And in the back I put in as many of the dead like this. I think it was 1,486. I've since found 43 more. We're up to 1,509. I know there's more out there, and I don't know if they'll ever show up, but I put them in. And then I got a phone call from one of the dead guys. Portland, Oregon. I said, yeah, page 193, I see I'm dead. He said, how did I die? You were a navigator on a plane that was shot down over Berlin. Your chances of survival were 0. so I killed you off. And he was nice about it. I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to write a book about the CCCs, and if you were in there, I'll put you in it. And he was in there. I think Jim Dwyer knows this guy.
Oh, I don't think so.
I guess you didn't run into him. Well, Bob Fivey knew it.
Oh, Bob Fivey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
His name was Emo Sable.
He just died about 2 years ago. He was in his late 90s.
Yeah, he was quite a guy. He's
Yeah.
a source of information too, I'll tell you. Anyway, this guy was from Ironwood, and he said he went through the CCCs, and then he went into the service. He survived being in a PO camp for 4 months, and then he went into the Forest Service. He was so inspired by what he learned in the CCCs that he went into forestry for the rest of his life. So I wrote this book, and I put a lot of stuff in there, and the publisher says this thing is never going to sell. So he ripped out a whole bunch of things. He took out the index. I'm not critical of him anyway. I'm just saying it wound up the way it is. He took out the index. I had more details on the dead, and wound up with a book of 200 pages. So, and it sold out in 4 weeks. It was gone, and nobody had any books. So he printed it again, and now we're on the third printing, which will be the last one. There aren't very many books left, but. Susan asked if I'd bring him along, and I wanted to anyway, so I brought him over there. And then the next book was about the CCC camps. The CCC camps overlapped the start of World War II. The war started for us in December 41, and the camps ended in July of 42. So I did have some information, and I went back to 1933, January 1, and started picking up as much information as I could. And it was very hard because some of these camps had 2 or 3 names. The government would call them one thing, the locals would call them another thing, and the guys who were in the camp would call them a third thing. And they were named after the nearest post office, or they were named after the nearest railroad spur, or they were named after some individual. Some camps, like I said, had 3 different names, and trying to sort all of this stuff took months and months and months. The camp would move from one spot to another and change its name, and then it'd come back and resume the first name, and then go somewhere else and change their name again. And then they split off, and half of the year would have them go there, and then 50 of them would go to this place and come back and go somewhere else and plant trees, and then another one would go along and dig up the trees and replant them. But anyway, I found out there were 123 of them, and found out an awful lot about camp life, and talked to some really wonderful people who have been through the CCC camps. And every one of them said, that's the best thing ever happened to me. The best thing ever happened to me. I made $30 a month, $1 a day, and that was a lot of money back then, but I only got $5. The other 25 went home. Now, if you were on welfare in the early days of the Depression, you made $23 a month for your whole family. And here comes $25 from Camp Pori for you to spend any way you want. You can't save it, you had to spend it. So right away, your income was doubled, your purchasing power was doubled, and this money started to spread out over the community, multiplied by 123 different places, and about 30,000 UP boys who were in the CCs, and another 20,000 from elsewhere who were in the CCCs up here. And the effect on the economy was immediate. People who couldn't even afford a pair of shoes could now go out and buy maybe 2 fare, buy the socks that went with them, buy new clothes, buy more seeds, buy more tools. If you had 2 in the camp, that was fantastic. Your income tripled. In the first few years, you were allowed only 6 months. You could apply for a second 6 months, but after 12, you were done. Later on, as it became tougher and tougher to get more candidates, in the state of Michigan, for instance, they had about 5 candidates for every opening, but as time went by, they had 1 candidate for every 5 openings. So some of them lasted a year and a half to 2 years. Every one of them said, that's the best thing ever happened to me. It made a man out of me. It saved my life. It saved my family's life. So I thought, why not write a book? Nobody ever did that either. Anybody have any comments or questions? Appreciate the fact my friends Dave and Elmer are here with the family, the Dutchers from the Sioux. They're from Marquette now. He's been elected a member of our coffee club. He does all our taxes for nothing. No, he doesn't. We just love to have him there. And I hope he appreciates us being there. I'm glad to see you folks here. Yes, sir.
Larry mentioned the Titanic. Are you aware of the connection of Joe Bayliss, for whom this library is
No,
named?
but I'm anxious to hear it.
He was, happened to be out in Washington DC right after the Titanic sank. And he was visiting a senator from Michigan.
Smith.
Is that who it was? Smith, okay. I was gonna
Smith.
say, okay. And I think he was chairman of some justice.
The investigating committee on the sinking.
See, now Don knows more about it than I do. Anyway, the senator wanted one of the heads of the company that owned the Titanic to be arrested.
Lord Ismay. Lord Ismay.
Lauren Ismay.
You're
And
a ventriloquist.
I gave the book on this to the library. Written by Michigan State, a professor down there, wrote the whole story of the hearing and everything else. And it is fascinating.
Oh, man.
Bayliss was a fishing buddy of Senator Smith. He used to come up here to fish. So he stopped to visit him in Washington, and he deputized him. So they went down, and Carpathia came in the dock, and they arrested Lord Ismay. And the hearing was at the Waldorf Astoria Ballroom on Monday morning. So Bayliss guarded him all weekend in the Waldorf Astoria. Yeah. So it's quite a story.
yeah, now just a coincidence, I happen to be sitting next to him. He didn't nudge me about this at all. But Bayliss was a sheriff of Chabot County. That's why he had some experience with this kind of thing. So yeah,
Isn't that
one of those pieces of trivia.
I read that one. Anybody else? I appreciate you all coming, especially on a rainy night.
Book I gave him to.
And there's some refreshments there. And anybody would like to go? And one more time, getting into the Historical Society. There are group photos of Camp Rico, 2 pages on each one. And if you study the photos, you notice that the cooks are in both pictures. In any camp picture you see, the cooks are in both of them, sitting in the same place. They must have arranged this on the QT among themselves. There's also group photos of the campers at Camp Strong's in the year 1937. Pictures of all the Fort Brady headquarters officials. They were responsible for the 6th district, which was the Upper Peninsula in 1937. The New York Times and Mining Journal articles about William Howard Taft. The total John Dillinger file is here. The list of county CCC camps is here. And the list of those 28 sailors I told you who had died in World War II.